Why, hello everybody, it's Captain Mikey and welcome back to Ship Explorer. Today we are doing part 2 of 2 of the Bismarck. Today, however, instead of going over here at the at sea portion, we're going to do the final operation. So, as you can read here, under fire and strained, the Bismarck falls. So that's what we're going to be checking out today. So, without any further ado, folks, let's get straight into it, huh? And we're going to watch this World War II reel before we get into the game. So that's the final battle, I guess, of the where the Battleship Bismarck went down. Or it could just be World War II battleship footage from any ship. Victory for sinking the Bismarck. Victorious, huh? Alright, here we go. Wow. Bismarck is minutes away from capsizing. Boy, she is destroyed. And sinking. And here we go. Look at that. You can see all the shells hitting the water. And look, you can even see the battleships over there firing at Bismarck. Okie doke. So let's get started, shall we? Throughout the battle, Rodney had periodically fired torpedoes from her submerged tubes, losing a total of 11 without success. At 09:57 hours, however, Rodney fired one more torpedo at very close range. An officer aboard observed a strike beam the bridge, though this hit remains difficult to confirm with absolute certainty. At such proximity, it is highly probable. If so, it marked the only known instance of a battleship torpedoing another battleship in combat. Oh, interesting. I think this is going to be like with some of the other ones where it's not going to be audio of Mike Brady, but I'm just going to have to read everything. Seaman Hans Springborn served in Britannic's diesel generator room number 2 in compartment 8, deep within the ship. When the order came to set scuttling charges, he inspected his generators one last time, ensuring power would remain as long as possible. Between 10:10 and 10:15, with the command to abandon ship, he climbed to the upper decks and was stunned by the devastation. Fires raging, decks twisted, and the ship resembling a heap of scrap metal. The boats and rafts were destroyed, the wounded lay helpless, and the medics gave sedatives to those beyond saving. When the shelling stopped, Springborn moved toward the ship's side as she listed sharply to port. Men were leaping overboard, many striking the exposed bilge keel and dying instantly. Choosing caution instead, he slid down the slanted hull, pushed off the bilge keel, and plunged into the Atlantic. Caught in the suction as Bismarck rolled and sank, Springborn fought to the surface and looked back as the battleship slipped beneath the waves. Alone, amid oil and wreckage, he began to swim, cold, exhausted, but alive. Okay. So as we can see, the ship is listing to port severely here. And, oh, I just got hit. And this whole ship is just destroyed. At 9:08, the forward gun turrets, both Anton and Bruno, were put out of action from sustained shell fire from HMS King George V. Worse still, the forward rangefinder was knocked out to leaving Bismarck with just her two aft turrets and 4 main guns to respond to the massed guns of the combined British fleet, some 15 battleship guns in total. The boatswain's mate, Paul Ruddick, was among the last to escape from Bismarck after fire control stations separated from the others. With Chief Warrant Officer Frederick Adams, he moved through smoke-filled passageways as the ship shuddered under continuous shell fire. When the hatch back to their station jammed, they pressed forward along the battery deck, searching for a way out through the twisted bulkheads and burning compartments. Near turret Bruno, they finally forced open a hatch and emerged into the slanted, wrecked main deck. The guns had fallen silent, only the sea and the groaning hull remained. Standing together amid the ruin, Adams offered Ruddick a cigarette. They smoked quietly in the wind and rain, the orange glow briefly lighting their faces. When the cigarettes were done, they shook hands and jumped into the Atlantic. Ruddick surfaced and swam clear. Adams did not. Wow. Can you just imagine that? Like, you know that you're probably going to die, and, you know, you just go to the edge here, and you just look out and just like, you know what? Let's have a cigarette. One last cigarette. And then, once you're done, you shake hands, and then you just jump overboard hoping that you'll survive. That's just amazing. You know, I know people like on Titanic were doing that too. They were just smoking one last cigarette before they're probably going to die. At 9:02 a.m., Bismarck received her first hits when a hail of shellfire smashed into the forecastle deck and the forward superstructure. Bismarck's bow was already damaged from her engagement with Hood and Prince of Wales, but the hits on the forecastle did little more than to destroy machinery spaces and crew berthing forward, leaving the battleship's forward turrets intact and firing. You know, I have to wonder, is there... I haven't seen any yet, but is there any photos, or is it just all stuff that I'm gonna have to read? Wow, look at that. Well, at least I can pull the lantern out, but it's kind of in the way, so I don't want that. The final engagement between Bismarck and the Royal Navy began at 8:47 a.m. when HMS Rodney opened fire, followed by HMS King George V from 20 kilometers or 12.4 miles. Turrets Anton and Bruno returned fire and straddled Rodney with shell fire so close it peppered the British warship with fragments. But in the face of the immense enemy force, Bismarck was totally outgunned. Was there any ships on this side? Maybe not. Okay. Wow. This is something else. Silenced at 9:08 a.m., one of the turrets, Anton or Bruno, managed one final unexpected salvo at 9:27, but under local control since the forward rangefinder had been disabled. The gunfire was ineffective. Okay. Admiral Tovey, frustrated by Bismarck's stubborn refusal to sink, ordered his forces to close still further and continue the bombardment. Rodney, now alongside Dorsetshire and Norfolk on Bismarck's starboard side, redoubled her fire, blasting the battered battleship with salvo after salvo, as the final act of Bismarck's tragedy drew near. Also, they did have ships on both sides, basically surrounding her with ships. Oof. We're not going up there just yet. Aboard Bismarck, the secondary gunners fought bravely, but to little effect. The ship's yawning motion and growing portless spoiled their aim. The forward 5.9-inch turret, just a beam of the bridge, became a particular target. Heavy British shells struck it repeatedly, peeling away armor, plates, and hurling them into the shattered remnants of the superstructure. Wow. Yeah, wow, look at that. This is just total destruction. Can I get behind here? Is there anything behind here? No? Okay. Nothing in the boat here? Okay. Wow. Look how close to the water we are. Anything here? Nope. It's just completely destroyed. Below the waterline, King George V landed several critical hits. One shell detonated low in Bismarck's hull, worsening the flooding. Even at close range, the British battleships struggled to penetrate Bismarck's main armor belt. But above and below it, the destruction was total. Shells riddled her upper works, collapsed bulkheads, and tore great holes in her under-armored sections. Are those brooms? They look like brooms. Dozens of crew sheltering here from the hellstorm above were killed instantly after shell fire struck home about 9:30 a.m. Other shells tore through into the decks and hull with relentless violence. Rodney had closed to within 3 nautical miles, point-blank range for her 16-inch rifles. Below decks, progressive flooding spread throughout the port turbine engine room as shells punched underwater holes through Bismarck's flanks. Wow. There must be like a fire above there. Okay, nothing there. Wow. Look at this. This is like flooding over here. It's on the deck. Seaman Werner Luss served in Bismarck's port engine room, tending the pumps amid the constant hum of turbines and the heat of confined machinery spaces. A survivor of the torpedoed cruiser Karl Schurz, I don't know how to say that. He immediately understood the gravity of Bismarck's fate when Ark Royal's Swordfish crippled the rudders on 26 May 1941. The announcement that the ship was no longer maneuverable brought back memories of that earlier sinking. Exhausted, Lust briefly fell asleep at his post, earning a sharp threat of court-martial from his chief petty officer, a reflection of the tension gripping the crew. When the final battle began the next morning, heavy shells hits shook the hull and water poured in through ventilation trunks, flooding the machinery spaces as smoke and oil filled the air. When the order to abandon ship came, Luss climbed through the dark wrecked passageways toward the upper decks. Reaching the open air, he emerged into fire, smoke, and freezing spray, escaping Bismarck as one of the few survivors from the port engine room. Wow. See, luckily I can walk through fire here, which is a good thing. Because in real life, I'd be burned alive right there. Wow. Machinist mate Henrik Kuhnt served in Bismarck's port engine room during the final battle. Machinist mate Henrik Kuhnt served in Bismarck's port engine room during the final battle, deep within the armored hull, where the plating still seemed to hold against the bombardment above. But as the ship began to list to port, the illusion of safety vanished. The groaning machinery and slanting deck reminded Kuhnt of the cruiser Karl Schurz, which he had survived when it was torpedoed in 1940. Around 9:30, a 356mm shell exploded in compartment X, flooding the port engine room. Water poured in through the ruptured bulkhead, and by 9:45, the scuttling order measure or is that 5, arrived. Cahoon and machinist Herbert Walter set explosive charges on the cooling water intakes, armed the timers, and begun to climb for the upper decks. A shell struck above them, plunging their route into darkness, but tearing open a hole that let in a faint light. Using the slates of a 105mm ammunition hoist, they pulled themselves upward through smoke and debris, finally emerging into the main deck. Bismarck was a ruin, fires raging, cartridges rolling loose, the aft turrets silent. As the list increased, Cahoon donned his life jacket and leapt into the sea, clinging to wreckage beside a civilian from the prize crew. He watched the battleship heel over and slide stern first beneath the Atlantic, like an elevator descending. Okay, so this name, Herbert Walter, I think this is the same guy that appeared in James Cameron's Expedition to Bismarck documentary. That's the one I told you about the last episode, where he was exploring the wreck, and he had survivors from the Bismarck disaster to accompany him, and I do remember one of the guys' names was Walters, and I think this is the guy. I wonder, is this like actually sinking, or is it just out? Or is it not? I mean, I know it looks like it's sinking, but is it really actually sinking? By 10 a.m., King George V had closed to less than 2 nautical miles from Bismarck's port side, firing relentlessly at such close range her main guns could penetrate any section of Bismarck's armor. Around 10 minutes later, a shell from King George V struck and exploded inside the aft canteen. Over 200 men had gathered there, including Executive Officer Owles, many still in the process of evacuating to the main deck. When the shell burst among them, over 100 were killed instantly, including Owles, who had been moving through the ship, warning the crew to abandon her. Wow. That's amazing. Aboard Rodney, one of the ship's chaplains, witnessing the appalling devastation through his binoculars, approached Captain Dalrymple Hamilton and implored him to cease fire, arguing that nothing remained but a burning wreck. I'm not even going to say that. Hamilton tersely dismissed him. Mind your own business. With that, the chaplain was dismissed from the bridge. The bombardment would continue until Bismarck was utterly destroyed. Wow. Her main deck is awash, for sure. Oh boy. Machinist mate, 3rd class Herbert Blum, was on duty in Bismarck's propulsion control center, manning the phone when the order came for Commander Lehman. Measure 5. Prepare to scuttle. Lehman received it quietly, turned to his men and said, "Men, go. You are dismissed." Blum left him, lament, and moved toward the electrical engineer's workshop near the funnel intakes. Believing the armor would protect him, he paused to rest until a 406mm shell from HMS Rodney tore through the decks above and exploded over the starboard boiler room. The blast threw him from his seat. He ran to help wounded men, but confronted with horrific injuries and chaos. Turned toward the upper decks on the battery deck, he found hundreds of men jammed in a mess area, struggling to open a hatch while Commander Oles shouted for them to hurry. As they forced it open, a shell burst through the armor and detonated. The explosion killed Oles and more than 200 men. Blum, stunned but still alive, joined a few survivors, forcing their way aft through wreckage in bodies until they reached a trunk leading to the main deck. Above, the ship was a ruin, superstructure shredded, fires burning along the sides. Blum helped bandage a wounded sailor, then moved aft past starboard 150mm turret where trapped men screamed behind a jammed hatch. Near turrets Dora and Caesar, he met Lieutenant Commander Jarjunuk, who gathered the remaining men and told them to salute Bismarck one last time before leaving her. Blum raised his arm with the others and in a final farewell then climbed down the slanting starboard side and leapt into the cold Atlantic as Bismarck slipped beneath the sea. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot to read here. Musician's mate Joseph Mahalberg served as an ammunition handler for the aft 105mm anti-aircraft guns on the starboard side of compartment. During Bismarck's last battle, his guns remained silent unless against the British battleships, while he and his comrades waited below, ready to replace losses in the heavy turrets. Between 9:30 and 10, boatswain Rolfie Frankie burst into the magazine with news that the ship was to be scuttled. Malberg and others tried to escape up the shell hoist, but found the way blocked and were forced back into the dark, smoke-filled passageways. Losing the others, he groped alone to the battery deck, where a confused crowd milled around and an officer urging them to fight the fires, pushing onto the starboard. Malberg found a hatch to the main deck and emerged into daylight. The ship was a wreck. The cranes smashed, superstructure gutted, the funnel torn apart. Unable to move forward, he turned aft and reached turret Dora, where the crew lay stunned. Climbing onto the turret roof, he was warned off by Chief Petty Officer Frederick Alfred Schubert, shouting, "Get away! The turret's going to explode!" Malberg scrambled down, ran to the starboard side, and jumped into the sea, escaping as Bismarck sank behind him. Wow. All these survivor stories are amazing. The final heavy caliber shell fired by Bismarck came from the left barrel of Dora. Despite the wreckage around him, Mansmat, Frederick Helms, Dora's guns captain managed to fire 2 final rounds. The second shell, fired at 9:31 hours, marked the end of Bismarck's main battery gunfire. Oh look, it looks like we can go into an interior space. Cool. Before we go down there, though, I gotta finish reading these. Oh my goodness. Seaman Bruno, I'll just say Z, a member of Damage Control Team Number 6, served in Bismarck's boiler room, machinery room, in compartment 12, tasked with keeping the propulsion plant operational under fire. As the ship's condition collapsed during the final battle, he left his post and encountered Commander Hans Olds on the battery deck. Olds was shouting that the ship was to be scuttled and all hands were to abandon ship. Z joined Olds and 7 others, including Eric Vogel and Hans Silberling, carrying wounded men towards compartment 13. A shell exploded above them, hurling the party back and killing most of the wounded. Another hit followed, shattering the ladder and leaving a gaping hole in the deck. Stunned, Z heard Vogel murmur, "Everyone here is dead, and we are the only ones alive." They moved forward to compartment 10, where Silberling, ordered to the machinery control station, said, "Farewell. We will not see each other again. Say hello at home for me." Alone, Z searched for an escape through the smoke-filled corridors as more shells struck. Near an access trunk, Lieutenant Arvid Thiel ordered, "Leave the wounded. They will sleep better there." Another explosion followed, killing those nearby. Waist deep in rising water, Z climbed the damaged trunk, forcing his way upward through heat and smoke until he reached the main deck. Amid fire and ruin, he leapt into the sea, one of the few from Bismarck's forward engineering spaces to survive. Wow. Oh my goodness. Machinist mate Bruno R. was stationed beside the midship air compressor on 26 May 1941 when Bismarck was struck by the fatal torpedo from Ark Royal's Swordfish aircraft. He watched with Seaman Frederick Junghans as rudders jammed, sealing the ship's fate. After a sleepless night under destroyer attack, R and his team tried in vain to repair the damaged air compressors to launch an Arado float plane. The catapult piping had been shattered by shell fire. At 800 the next morning, battle stations sounded for the last time. Moments after revealing his comrade Rudy Romer, a major caliber shell exploded nearby, filling his compartment with steam. Romer was killed, cut off from orders. R and his men stayed at their post until flooding and smoke forced them forward. They heard the command to scuttle and began to evacuate. On the battery deck, he found carnage, dead men, wrecked machinery, and gas-filled corridors. Using a crowbar, they pried open a jammed hatch and crawled to the main deck. The ship above was a ruin, bodies everywhere, the air thick with smoke, turret door shattered, and one barrel split open. Waves washed blood across the decks as Bismarck heeled to port. Men were already jumping into the sea. Our pause, struck by the calm of inevitability, then leapt overboard from the water. He saw Bismarck's stern lift and the great ship slide backwards beneath the Atlantic, the last he would ever see of her. Man, there's a lot to talk about. But it seems like all these stories they're all very, very similar with each other. Chief Petty Officer Wilhelm Schmidt, commander of Bismarck's damage control team. I oversaw the stern section during the ship's final battle. Early in the engagement, he received word from damage control central to send men topside to fight fires aft. None of them returned. Around 9:35, Bismarck took several direct hits from King George V and Rodney. 5 heavy shells struck the stern, blasting through the decks above and shaking the ship violently. Explosions in compartments 1 and 2 filled the area with choking gases and fires, while additional hits aft shattered lighting jammed hatches and tore ladders from their mounts. The fumes seeped into the compartment 3, where Schmidt's team was stationed, wounding several men with splinters. A second request for men to fight fires in the aft superstructure brought the same result. Those sent never returned. When word came that flames had reached Dora's magazines, Schmidt flooded the space using pump number 2, saving the ammunition from detonation. After the scuttling order measure 5 arrived, Schmidt deactivated all pumps in his section before ordering his remaining men topside. He followed shortly after 10, as explosions from the engine rooms reverberated below. Fighting his way through the warped hatches, and twisted ladders, he emerged onto a deck littered with wreckage and smoke, the ship listing heavily to port. And inspecting the after turrets, he found deep gouges in the armor and Dora's right barrel torn apart from what seemed to be an explosion inside the barrel. Near the stern, Schmidt joined a handful of survivors. Together they gave a final salute before abandoning ship. As he surfaced in the cold Atlantic, Bismarck was already sinking stern first amid the smoke and fire. Oh boy. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stories here. Machinist mate 3rd Class Gerard K. was stationed in the starboard turbine room as Bismarck faced the British battleships. For a time, the space remained intact. Then near misses sent seawater and smoke flooding through the ventilation trunks. The men worked steadily in the choking air, following every order as best they could. When offered relief, Kay refused, remaining at his post until the command came to prepare for scuttling. He and his comrades set charges on the condenser inlets and intake valves, lit the fuses, and left the turbines still turning as they climbed toward the upper decks. Emerging on the main deck, they found devastation. Bodies lay piled where men had fallen, and fires burned amid wreckage and oil. Near turret Dora, its barrel split open. Scorched gunners stood dazed and blinded by heat. With Bismarck listing hard to port, Kay put on his life jacket and slid down the slanted hull and leapt from the starboard bilge keel. The suction dragged him under, but he fought free and surfaced in the dark sea. When he looked back, Bismarck was gone. Seaman Heinz J. served in Bismarck's after gunnery control room, operating the analog computers for the 380mm main battery deep within the ship. A former milk inspector from East Prussia, what is it, like Russia? Prussia. He joined the Navy seeking adventure, convinced the mighty battleship was invincible. At dawn on the 27th May, as the final battle begun, the main fire control was destroyed, leaving Lieutenant Commander von M. Reichberg aft to direct the guns. By 9:10, the turrets were in local control, firing their last shells. Around 9:45, the scuttling order came. Jucknaught joined Ensign Heinz A. Franz, Halk, and others in a climb up a narrow, dark communications aft to the aft fire control station. its deck slick with blood and the rangefinder blown away. When shelling ceased, von M. Richburg ordered them topside. Jucknut and his comrades reached the main deck through smoke and wreckage, then jumped into the cold Atlantic, escaping the ship he had once believed could never be sunk. Oh my goodness. Okay. Okay, before we... Maybe I should get these two. I know. There's a lot of these that are very long. Seaman Herman Budick joined Bismarck while she was still fitting out at Blom and Voss. Among her earliest crew during completion, he lived aboard the accommodation ship General Artigas before transferring permanently to the battleship. When she entered service, he was assigned to damage control team on the Unteres platform deck, serving as a talker, relaying messages through the ship's communications network. When the final battle began, Budick was hit by shell splinters and carried to a triage station near Turret Dora on the battery deck. The medics, admitting only critical cases, left him outside the dressing station. Moments later, a 356mm shell struck the turret's barbette, killing everyone inside. Stunned and half defended, Budick realized he had survived by chance. He stumbled through the wreckage and blood-slicked decks, made his way upward through the smoke and chaos, and ultimately escaping the ship before Bismarck slipped beneath the sea. Ooh. Man, I'm telling you, some of these are super hard to read. At 9:21 a.m., Turret Dora suffered a catastrophic failure. A premature detonation in the right barrel sent a searing explosion, flashing back into the turret, killing the entire gun crew and shredding the barrel into twisted ribbons of steel. The left gun crew, burned and disoriented, struggled on in the smoke-choked wreckage for another 10 minutes. Wow. That is nuts. Alright, let's go in here finally. Is it flooded? Oh, yes it is. And as before, we just no-clip through things, and it's hard to see. Wow. Yeah, this whole area is just completely flooded. Sparks everywhere. Look at the water pouring, just almost like a waterfall out that door. This side is high and dry, and there's still power. But there is a fire over here, which I cannot get to. I am completely blocked off for some reason. Okay. So that's the little bit of interior that we can see. Alright, so let's continue to head forward again. There are so many things we gotta read here. Lieutenant Zur C. Gunther Bruckner, Dora's commanding officer, gave the order to abandon the shattered turret just after 9:30 a.m. The aft magazines were promptly flooded to prevent any catastrophic detonations. Oh boy, this is going to be a lot. Jeez. Lieutenant Commander Gerard Janock formerly Bismarck's chief damage control officer, had been reassigned 6 weeks before the ship's final sortie to the middle engine room, a change he accepted with his usual professional discipline. The officer who replaced him, Lieutenant Commanders Emil J, considered it a demotion. Junak, who had devised many of the ship's safety systems, including the Junak's hammer, used to break into jammed compartments, now oversaw engineering operations deep in the hull. After the torpedo hit that jammed Bismarck's rudders, Junak worked directly under Captain Lindemann, attempting to restore control with the engines. When it became clear that repairs were impossible, he spent the night in the after engine room as the ship fought off destroyer attacks. At dawn, he briefly relieved Chief Engineer Lehman in the turbine control center before returning to his post. As the battle raged, smoke and water seeped through the ventilation shafts, and Junak ordered gas masks on. The thunder of gunfire was unending. No orders came from the bridge, and the messenger he sent to the bridge never returned. Shortly before 10, Commander Lehman passed down the order to prepare for scuttling Measure 5. Junak retrieved the white box marked with a red 5, armed the explosives at the cooling water intakes, and ordered his crew topside. By 10:10, the charges were set with a 9-minute delay. Climbing through the decks, Junak passed silent, half-lit compartments in the smell of burning bordite. Around 10:20, the time charges detonated. Moving aft, he found trapped men forced open a jammed hatch, leading them upward. On deck, fires raged and wreckage covered the plating between the funnel and after turrets. Near turrets, Caesar and Dora. Young officers were organizing survivors to abandon ship. With Bismarck heeling hard to port, Junak gathered the hesitant men and led them to the starboard rail. After 3 faint, half-hearted cries of "Sea Kyle," they went over the side, some sliding down the hull over, misjudging their jumps and fatally striking the bilge keel. Junak entered the sea last, shouting for them to swim clear of the sinking ship. He watched as Bismarck rolled farther to port, the starboard bilge keel rising into view, then slowly lifted by the bow before sliding stern first beneath the Atlantic. After 10 a.m., Bismarck listed heavily to port, her main deck awash, her stern sagging deeper into the gale-driven Atlantic. Bodies and debris were washed from her decks as massive waves, whipped up by force 9 winds, pounded her hulk. Men poured over the starboard side in a desperate attempt to escape. Many survivors had difficulty reaching the open decks, their way blocked by wrecked hatches and twisted ladders. Most who managed to escape the inferno came from the engineering spaces below. Less exposed to the shelling, wounded and dying sailors flung themselves into the raging sea. Some, misjudging the ship's tilt, struck the bilge keel and were killed or gravely injured on their way down. Okay, let's continue forward. Throughout the final engagement with Bismarck, Rodney alone had fired 90 salvos, with King George V having fired a similar number. A brutal, systematic battering after salvo 98 Rodney, with her guns depressed almost as low as possible, began aiming at Bismarck's waterline to maximize the chance of shells penetrating beneath the armor belt. The blast effect from firing at such a low elevation inflicted tremendous damage on Rodney's own decks. Light bulbs were shattered throughout the forward sections, forcing crews to work under the flicker of emergency lamps and flashlights. Heavy cruiser HMS Norfolk closed to within 10 nautical miles, ranking Bismarck's upper works with 8-inch fire. Her shells tore into the German battleship's superstructure and wrecked the starboard secondary gun mounts, stripping away their fighting strength with ruthless efficiency. At 10:20 a.m., cruiser Dorsetshire moved in for the final act. Bismarck was listing steeply, clearly doomed. Dorsetshire fired 2 torpedoes into Bismarck's starboard side and circled around to fire a third into her port side at 10:36 hours, striking just as the giant ship began to capsize. 4 minutes later, Bismarck rolled over to port and slipped beneath the waves, leaving hundreds of men struggling in the cold, oil-slickened Atlantic. The temperature was just above freezing. Heavy fuel oil covered the surface, choking the survivors and burning their eyes. Seaman apprentice Paul Hillen served deep within the Bismarck's hull in the shell room for the second 15-centimeter turret on the starboard side. A cramped steel-lined compartment buried in compartment just aft of the starboard engine room. When the alarm sounded on 27th of May 1941, the watertight doors were sealed from both sides, trapping Hillen and his comrades inside. They passed shells upward toward the turret until every round was fired. The phone rang constantly with instructions from the pump room to check for heat along the walls. Then the line went dead. When it rang again, the message was clear: abandon ship. Petty Officer Hartwig at first dismissed it as nonsense, but soon told the men to go. With no direct exit, Hillen and several others climbed the ammunition hoist shaft to the something deck, forcing their way through smoke-filled passages. Fires blocked the way forward, so he turned aft, reaching the battery deck on the port side in compartment 10. He found merchant marine prize crews sitting silently on their sea bags. A shell pierced the overhead and exploded below, killing and wounding many of them. Hillen urged the survivors to follow him, but none moved. He continued alone, trying to force open a vent cover and later a 20mm ammunition hatch, but both were jammed. Retracing his steps, he pressed aft through wrecked compartments until he finally reached the main deck. Merging into smoke and flame, he found Bismarck burning, listening hard to port, and made his escape, leaping from the dying ship. Okay, I think we're almost forward. I guess I gotta crouch, because, yeah, there's no other way. There we go. Okie doke, I think we are finally, right? Yes, we are literally finally here. Okay, so we've made our way around. So now we can actually finally head up right through the burning flames. Alright. As shells rained down, the forward section of Bismarck erupted in chaos of fire and smoke inside. Inside turret Bruno, the blast turned the compartment into a furnace, white hot metal. Ricocheting splinters ignited the powder charges being hoisted for reloading. The pressure built catastrophically. The turret lifted bodily from its bearings, smashed back down, and blew out its rear armor plate with a violent roar, hurling debris across the deck. The crew within stood no chance. Immediately, the magazines for Anton and Bruno were flooded to avert an even greater explosion. Wow. Anything over here on this side? Nope. Okay. So now we can go up. And we'll do the exact same as we did before in the previous episode. I'm not really seeing much of anything over here, but that's okay, because I need a little break from that. From all that reading. Just look at all this destruction. This is crazy. Uh-oh. Oh, it's probably because the ship is listing. Okay, let's see here. Seaman Apprentice Theo Class served on Bismarck as part of the forward starboard 105mm anti-aircraft gun crew. One of the few survivors from the ship's upper decks and among the only men from the 105mm batteries to live. During the final battle, his position was hit repeatedly by fire from HMS Norfolk and the HMS Yorkshire. At the start of the engagement, the 105mm crews were ordered to take cover their guns unless against battleships and cruisers. Klaus, I don't know how you say that, lingered at his station for a few moments to watch for aircraft, then turned to follow his comrades to go to the nearby shelter space. Just before entering, he stopped to use the restroom. Well, that's interesting. As he approached the standby shelter room, a 356mm shell tore through the deck above and exploded inside, killing nearly his entire crew. Klaus was hurled to the deck, stunned and concussed. He later recalled the experience as a blur of light and noise. Like a flickering film, his brief stop at the restroom had saved his life. A gaping hole still visible on the wreck marks the blast that spared him. Just forward of his 105mm mount. Dazed but alive, Klaus escaped the dying ship and made it overboard before Bismarck slipped beneath the sea. Wow, that's actually pretty amazing. And he was supposed to go there with the others too. Which means if he had not stepped into the restroom, he would have been probably killed. That's amazing. Just that one little act of, hey, let me just take a leak real quick. And that saved his life. With the German battleship's accuracy fading, approaching 9 a.m., HMS Norfolk moved up and joined the fray, engaging with her 8-inch guns. Bismarck responded with her starboard secondary batteries under local control, but her fire was sporadic and increasingly ineffective. Rodney, closing the range with grim determination, was the beginning to land punishing blows. Oh my goodness. Oh boy. Seaman Johannes Zimmerman served in Bismarck's middle boiler room, number 2, just forward of the middle engine room. Reporting for duty at 1600 on 26th of May 1941, he remained there through the torpedo strike and the long night of destroyer attacks, sustained only by dextrose tablets and caffeinated chocolate in the stifling air. Cigarettes, though forbidden, were passed around in secret as the crew waited in exhaustion and dread. When the final battle began, 3 heavy shells exploded above the boiler room, filling it with choking fumes. Believing the British had used gas, the men donned masks. Around 9:30 came the order to scuttle. Most of the crew released, while the officer and chief petty officer set the charges. Zimmerman climbed towards the battery deck, passing through compartment 8, where he saw the aftermath of the blast that had killed Commander Olds and dozens of others. Mangled bodies and twisted metal filling the passage. He escaped through a hatch near the aft starboard 150mm turret. On deck, he saw devastation everywhere, even a lone 20mm gun still firing into the empty sky. Climbing to the whatever deck, he met an old school friend, Herman Emmerlich. They shook hands and promised that if one survived, he would tell the other's family. With Bismarck heeling sharply to port, they went aft together and jumped. Zimmerman survived. Emmerlich did not. Wow. Seaman Carl August Schultz served in Bismarck's middle engine room under Lieutenant Commander Gerard Junick. After the torpedoes struck on 26th of May, Junick returned from inspection and reported that the rudders were destroyed. Repairs impossible through the long night that followed. The men waited in silence, knowing the British would return at dawn. When the final battle began, Schultz felt the ship convulse under the bombardment from Rodney and King George V. When the scuttling order came, he urged his crewmates to leave out of this witch's cauldron, out of this death hole. Go topside. He climbed through smoke-filled passages to the upper decks, where the ship lay in ruin. Turrets were split open, fires raged unchecked, and the decks were strewn with bodies. He found a wounded lieutenant from his division, both legs gone, who calmly asked for a cigarette and made Schultz promise to deliver a message to his family. Schultz agreed, then moved aft and jumped into the sea. Okay. Anything more? So we move aft. Okay. Oh, good. A little bit of a break. And that little break has ended. So, ooh! Yikes. At Chief Petty Officer Kramer's urging, Seaman Second Class Johann Rydell, I'll just say Johann R. reluctantly opened the turret C hatch and saw devastation. Bodies piled near the turret, men dead and dying behind shattered armor. Lieutenant Gunther Bruckner then ordered the crew to leave, reminding them to die as good seamen if they must. R and Gunnar's mates Heller were the last to exit. On deck, R met his friend Adolf Eich. I don't know how you say that. From the aft fire control station, they shared a last cigarette, stripped to their underclothes, and put on life jackets. A shell fragment wounded R's leg, but he pressed on. Near turret Dora, he saw Lieutenant Commanders Janop and von M. Richberg directing survivors over the side amid wreckage and corpses. Helping others into the sea, R finally climbed down the starboard side and dove into the cold Atlantic. Yeah. Oh, man. Can you hear that ship groaning? Oh, boy. Seaman Second Class Johann R. served in Bismarck's turret Caesar as a rammer for the right-hand gun, part of a 40-man crew working between the loading deck and magazines below. When the British battleships were sighted, the turret crew went to battle stations and performed their duties with discipline and precision. R's role was routine but vital, unlocking the breech, loading projectile and charges. Hydraulics failed, electric drives engaged instantly, and the gun crew continued their work until a 356mm shell from King George V struck the faceplate, disabling R's gun shooting. Soon afterward came the order to scuttle and abandon ship. Here's another one. Turret Caesar was knocked out by repeated hits from King George V, and once the elevation gear was destroyed, the turret was next to useless. Seaman George Herzog manned Bismarck's third 37mm anti-aircraft gun on the port side aft. As the final battle began on the 27th of May, 1941, he watched the first salvos from Rodney and King George V crash in. Flames already rising from the foredeck, Chief Petty Officer Wynand called for men to carry the wounded. Herzog helped briefly before heavy shell fire forced them to scatter. He saw turret Anton struck and silenced, then the forward command tower hit. Word spread that Admiral Lutjens was dead, and rumors followed that Captain Lindemann had fallen, too. Released from his gun, Herzog went below to his mess space near turret Dora, where he drank from a small bottle of rose liqueur and lay down amid the thunder of gunfire and the cries of the wounded. A massive shell hit nearby, plunging the space into darkness. Realizing he could no longer remain below, he climbed to the main deck and made his way aft, where he met Herbert Manthe. Together, they prepared to escape as the stern was swept by towering plumes from near misses. A blast injured Herzog's foot, and moments later a surge of water swept swept him and others overboard. After 15 minutes of struggle in the freezing sea, he reached a raft already holding Manthe and Otto H. The three men clung together, watching Bismarck, burgeoning and broken, slip beneath the gray Atlantic. Whew. Above the waterline, Bismarck was being pounded into a charnel house of horror. Familiar compartments were rendered unrecognizable. Bodies and shattered limbs were heaped 4 deep. Fires raged unchecked across the decks. The wounded lay screaming where they fell, many torn apart by shell fragments or flying debris. Medical teams fought to administer morphine and bandages, but they too were soon cut down by the relentless shell fire. Seawater and blood mingled on the listing decks, flowing together in a macabre rivers. Anyone who ventured topside after 1,000 hours found scenes beyond anything he could have ever imagined. Death and destruction on a scale defying description. Wow. Okay. Okay, nothing's there. Shortly before 9:30 a.m., Bismarck suffered a devastating series of hits near the port catapult. One shell penetrated and exploded among the stores of 105mm ready-use ammunition, unleashing a violent secondary explosion that tore apart the superstructure near the funnel. Okay, look at this. Look at this. We can go inside again. Ooh. Oh my goodness, it's complete. It's dark. I can't see anything. Barely. It's like one little emergency light. Well, at least the plane is undamaged. Okay. I think... Well, at least I got through. So that's to climb up. Nothing more over on this side. I think we're reaching... Yeah, we've reached the end. Well, at least of this part. Alright, we are now one more level up towards the aft of the ship. There is just stuff everywhere. What a mess. Okay. So right off the bat, at least we get like a little bit of a break. I don't know. Can we climb this? Yes. Okay, here's something right here. Seaman Second Class Herbert Manthe manned the 5th starboard 20mm gun aboard Bismarck, where he had been all night. At 0600, the crew was briefly released from battle stations for some much-needed rest. The ship rolled heavily, listing slightly to port. An attempt to launch an Arado seaplane failed. It was pushed overboard and sank. Within the hour, battle stations sounded again as smoke appeared on the horizon. Soon enemy shells were falling close aboard. Manthey's headset went dead early into the fight, cutting communication with fire control as shell fire intensified. The 20mm crew sought to shelter. Manthe joined 20 men near the after fire control station, then moved under turrets Caesar and Dora. After near hits, they cut loose several life rafts and most were destroyed. Manthe and his shipmate George Herzog found a rubber dinghy between the turrets and pulled it between Dora for cover. A near miss off the starboard side swept them and several others into the sea between 0930 and 9:45. In the freezing water, Manthe and Herzog swam 15 minutes through falling shell fire to reach the dinghy, then drifted astern of the sinking battleship. Bismarck listed steeply to port, still firing sporadically. Around 10:15, Manthe saw the distant cruisers Norfolk and Dorsetshire still engaging her. The dinghy had no provisions. As the sun rose, the men despaired of rescue, until a Luftwaffe Condor appeared overhead. That evening, U-74 surfaced and took them aboard, giving them food and bunks before resuming the search, which yielded only bodies and wreckage. After reaching port, Manthe was debriefed in Paris and Berlin. His account was later read to Hitler during Admiral Raeder's briefing on 6 of June 1941. Granted survivors leave, Manthe returned to duty and was killed 4 years later on April 1945 during the defense of Berlin, one of Bismarck's last survivors to fall. Wow. Alright. Go through the fire. Yeah, at least we can enter there. Oh boy. Seaman Franz Elk, just 19 years old, served in Bismarck's after gunnery control room, operating the mechanical fire control computers that directed the ship's heavy guns. A close friend of Adolf E. and Heinz Jucknot. When the final battle began on 27th of May, Hulk remained at his post deep within the armored citadel. For a time, only distant sounds of explosions reached them. By 9:20, the after rangefinder had been destroyed by a 356mm shell from King George V, forcing the aft turrets into local control. Their instruments fell silent. Cut off from communication, they soon received word the ship was to be scuttled. Following, Ensign Heinz A. Elk and his comrades attempted to escape. Blocked by fires on the port side, they climbed a narrow communications tube to the after fire control station, emerging amidst smoke bodies and the wrecked cupola open to the sky. When gas seeped in, Baron von M. Reichberg ordered them to don masks up and had none until Jucknot gave him one from a fallen shipmate. When the order to abandon ship came, Helk hesitated until Ake urged him on. Together they made their way to the starboard side and leapt into the oil-slickened sea. Man, some of these names are so hard to pronounce. Lieutenant Commander Baron Burkhard von M. Reichberg, Bismarck's 4th gunnery officer, was stationed in the aft fire control station during the final battle. After the forward turrets were destroyed and both 1st Gunnery Officer A. Schneider and 2nd Gunnery Officer A. were killed, he took command of the 2 remaining aft main turrets, Caesar and Dora. Seaman Adolf E. served in Bismarck's aft fire control room, operating the transmitter that relayed range and elevation data to the after turrets. After the destroyer attacks on the night of 26 May, Ensign Heinz A. granted the men a brief respite on deck. E. stepped into the cool air and saw Captain Lindemann and Commander Schneider speaking quietly on the bridge. A fleeting moment of calm before battle. At dawn, when the final engagement began, the forward control station was destroyed, and command passed to Lieutenant Commander von M. Reichberg aft. E. and his crew continued transmitting firing data until a shell hit disabled their position as well. With the turrets forced into local control, Bismarck's last guns soon fell silent. Chief Warrant Officer Frederick Adams then announced the order to scuttle and release the men from duty. Following whatever that is, E. and several others escaped through starboard side, navigating fire and wreckage at the base of a narrow communications tube. E. began climbing toward the upper deck, forcing his way past a dead comrade wedged in the shaft. At the top, von M. Reichberg opened the hatches and ordered the men to lie flat as shellfire pounded the ship. When the barrage eased, E. gave permission to leave. E. helped Franz Elk to the main deck, where flames and ruins stretched in every direction. Near turret Dora, a gaping hole burned through the barbette, and 2 men fell into the fire below. Joined by Hans Riedel, E. and his companions made their way down the starboard side. The deck steeply canted. They paused for a final look at their sinking ship, then jumped into the cold Atlantic. Hey, there is so much to read. A 356mm shell from King George V soon struck the 10.5 meter aft rangefinder, tearing it away and destroying the aft control systems. The blast hurled 4th Gunnery Officer von M. Reichberg to the deck, wounding him, but he ordered the aft turrets to continue firing under local control. Okay. Wow. Yep. That's destroyed. Alrighty. I think we're getting closer to the end. I know that. It is so hard to read these names. Mike Brady, why aren't you reading to us? You're supposed to be reading to us. Because there's debris blocking. Oh no, in the last video, I went into that lifeboat and I got stuck. I am not doing that again. Let's head up these stairs. Rodney, zigzagging in and out of her firing line, was gradually diverging from King George V. Despite Bismarck's wild yawning, Schneider's fourth salvo was a perfect straddle across Rodney, a final tribute to his skill under impossible conditions. At 08:58 hours, Bismarck's seventh salvo achieved another straddle, but it would be her last. Thereafter, Bismarck's gunnery rapidly degraded, and Admiral Toby's force ceased to regard her fire as a significant threat. Okay, so let's go up. We'll climb up. Oh my goodness. Wow. Oh, I can still climb up. Whoa. Look at that destruction. Ooh, that is nuts. Wow. Whee! Parkour! Okay. Hey, at least I can still ring the bell. Okay. Parkour! Alright, so now we're going to climb the funnel right through the fire. Wow. Oof. All that smoke in my face. Oh, that's climbed down. I'm not trying to climb down just yet. Alright, I gotta crouch through this, because otherwise it's not gonna let me go through. Surprisingly, I'm not seeing any, wait. Oh, okay. So, okay, so we're getting towards the end here, so all I really have is this whole entire forward tower, at least most of it, should I say. So, let me come back down here. And then... Whoa! Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, that's not cool. Alright, after that disastrous debacle of trying to get right here, I'm finally over here. So, we're going to climb up, and we're going to climb up this forward tower. And we'll continue to tour the ship. We don't have much more to go. After 9:10 a.m., Oberlieutenant, is that how you say that? Oberlieutenant Frederick Cardinal in the forward main battery plotting room called through the battered internal lines. The main fire control station was unresponsive, and turrets Anton and Bruno were out of action. Cardinal gave the terse command, action circuits aft, control of the surviving turrets. Caesar and Dora now shifted to M. Reichberg at the aft fire control station instead. Okay. So before we go up, so what does this say? At 9:11 a.m., Rodney fired her 35th salvo at a 16-inch shell punched into the lower mast deck, striking the heavily armored conning tower where Captain Lindemann, Admiral Luchins, and the remnants of the command staff were gathered. Death must have come instantly. 3 minutes later, other heavy shells struck the conning tower again, blowing open the armored access door in a shower of steel. Wow. Okay. I cannot get through. So is this where they were? Oh my goodness. Good Lord. Bismarck's course was wholly at the mercy of the storm. She pitched and yawned, violently lurching with the heavy seas. Her target remained Rodney, but at 0902 hours, disaster struck. A salvo of 8-inch shells from Norfolk smashed into her central fire control director, instantly killing everyone stationed there, including K. A. Schneider, the man whose gunnery had destroyed Hood. With the fire control center silenced, Bismarck, once steady fire, faltered. Okay, I guess we can climb up. Wow. Nuts. Alright, so now we'll go over here. Is there anything over here? No. So now we'll head up again. Come on. So we still gotta go up one more flight to be even with that up there. Because the ship is tilting, I keep getting stuck on stuff. And I'm not seeing any other stuff over here for me to read. Alright, so after that disastrous point of trying to get up this flight of stairs that I couldn't get up, it just wouldn't allow me to for any reason, I am finally over here. I had to climb the funnel and go through that way, and even that gave me issues. But okay, let's finish this off, shall we? With her fighting power extinguished, Executive Officer Hans Olds took the final grim step just after 9:30 a.m. He ordered the scuttling of the ship. He directed the engine room crews to open the watertight doors and instructed damage control parties to arm the scuttling charges. Bismarck was already fatally wounded, listing, flooding, and bleeding from 1,000 wounds, but Olds meant to ensure she would not fall into enemy hands. While his men worked swiftly below, Olds led a party topside to warn the surviving crew the ship was to be abandoned. Timers were set, yet scuttling a Leviathan like Bismarck would take time, even after the charges detonated. Though the charges hastened her death, Bismarck was already mortally wounded. Without them, she still would have sunk, only more slowly and with yet more suffering. Okay. Wow. This is nuts. Just completely destroyed. Alright, I think we're coming down to the very, very end here. Wow. You see that? The way the screen just... it adjusts. Ooh. I can enter. That is if I can get through. I'd freaking crouch. But at least I can enter. And this one is completely destroyed. Sparks flying everywhere. Fire. Okay. Ugh. The amount of flames, man. Okay. Here we are. At the top. Alright, well, that's it. That's the end of the tour. Bismarck is going down. So, alright, everybody, thank you for watching. I'm going to call that an episode. I had a lot of fun. Although the reading is very, is quite something. I wish Mike Brady would narrate for us instead of just constantly reading all this. As he's better at it than I am. But alright, I'm going to link in the description so you guys could walk through this for yourself. Maybe see some areas maybe I didn't see. Yeah. And, alright, well, that's it. I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye for now.